So welcome back. This is segment 2 of an interview with Tony Cyriac. Tony is from the great company of Charles Schwab. And Tony has been sharing with us some of his insights, not only based on the last couple of years that he's been working at Charles Schwab, but also a number of his experiences prior in other large organizations, predominantly in the financial sector. But Tony shared with us in segment 1 a couple of insights in terms of maturing and scaling. And in this second segment, we're going to focus more directly on the whole aspect of driving value, driving business value. And Tony introduced this in segment 1. But I'd like to just really hand over right now to Tony to continue to pick up that subject and give us a little bit more of an in-depth insight into what he's seen as being the things that lead to success when you focus on driving value for clients and for the business.
Absolutely. As I said, first of all, thank you, Derek. As I said, our mission here is to accelerate client and business value with harnessing the power of data analytics and AI. That's what we do. And we organize against the 3 pillars that I mentioned, and maturing and scaling. And this is the second one, driving value. And the third one about enabling talent and a data-driven culture. So on driving value, I think to me, this is like at the heart of it. There's a, it's kind of the middle of the 3 pillars. This is the heart of it, which is eventually, what we are doing here is for an outcome and a purpose, which is oriented to clients and our business. And working back from that, it's easy to say these words, but you find that it's very hard to do in driving value and getting your partners to recognize that this is driving value for the clients and for the business, right? So how do we go about this? So here is my experience, right? I think it starts with, you have to listen, learn before you start prescribing anything, right? So you got to start, listen, learn. I think that's where it starts. So my experience in these roles is, the first 90 days, set yourself a target that you're going to go meet as many leaders in the company as possible in the first 90 days. So my goal was 100 leaders in 90 days. Just imagine doing that in a new company in the middle of COVID, where everybody is remote and you have zero trust capital from your prior relationships, right? Just think of that scenario. But I think it is doable, and it has been done in that sense, right? So I think spend the time, go talk to them. Yes, it starts with a quick intro, what you bring to the table. You have to give something that establishes your credibility, but then they're open to dialogue. They are hungry for outcomes. And the moment they hear you can accelerate something for them, they're interested. So talk to them, find out what is, foundational that they need, things that are broken that we need to address. And then get into, hey, what are business priorities that you are really trying to drive that we can kind of help you with? So first point is about run the business, keep the run the business. What do I do to help you? Second is, what are your business priorities for the year that you're trying to drive and forward, where we could be partnering with and helping you? Third is about your own view that you're forming from all of these conversations on what are foundational things you can do common that addresses many of the things you heard in the first 2 buckets. And then the fourth is exploring the art of the possible with that leader. So every one of those conversations, I would do these 4 aspects. Here and now, run the business points, the priorities ahead, and then I'm forming a view of foundational things that are needed from all of these conversations, and then explore the art of the possible, which is say, hey, if we were to do this, for example, today you are leading, let's say, all our private client business. Now, if we could get some more insights into the hands of every one of those private client advisors in these following ways? Would that help? And then there is a little bit of a conversation that leads to some kind of an aha moment. Even in that first conversation, that's great. That's enough exciting point at which you can now invite to a process where the larger group from that organization can be part of, where you could do ideation through those 4 categories that I mentioned, and then eventually get to a roadmap that helps drive the outcomes for that particular area. And then behind the scenes, you're stitching them in your mind for common things that you could do once and get to the bigger outcomes. So you do this, like this is one core kind of step or set of steps, if you may, which is having that conversation, eventually exploring and getting to the point of a roadmap of data and analytics for that area. And then in your mind, stitching together the common points, which are an integrated view of that, right? The second part of this is the value identification point, which is not it's not independent from the first, but along this conversation or in a follow-up conversation, a structure has to be set in place, which describes what value it drives against the outcomes of that business, against the larger client outcomes that we are trying to drive for the company. And that, don't get too scientific about it. It's not going to be all math at once at the beginning, but iterate through that over a period of time. So we took a lens of, hey, let's assign it to 4 outcomes, right? It's about client experience, better risk management, it is growth for the company, and it is about efficiency. Just take those 4 or 5 and try to assign that value. And to the extent you can be numerical, go ahead, but work with the leaders and the parties to assign that. Once you have these 2 in place, I think you have a way to now start thinking about execution with that. And it has both ends, which is, we put it in a timeline spectrum of now, next, later. It's not precise in exact dates by which it will get done, but it organizes your thought around what needs to get done now, what is the next, and what is later. So roughly the next is in the next 3 quarters, now is the current quarter, and then everything else is in the later bucket. Now you get into a discipline of a product-based approach in thinking through the capabilities required, the things that you can do now, and the things you can do for a sustained business value in terms of execution. Then there's a regular cadence that you do with each business on an ongoing basis, right? So this is the kind of general approach I've taken in my experience, and it has yielded results. It is hard to translate from driving value to these steps, but I think, and what I described, many of you may think, hey, there's no rocket science to this. Yes, there isn't. It's simple, but these simple steps really helps in my view, and you just get people along the journey. You've heard their pains, you've heard their priorities, you're putting a plan that works for them. You're also thinking about it strategically on the common things and what is the bigger picture for the company for sustained value. So that's the combination that I would recommend.
Yeah, some really good points that I'd love to kind of go back over a little bit and get further comment on. One of the key things that you said there was, getting, spending time with the business and making sure that during the first 90 days you're speaking to like 100 business people. And I know it's kind of like a marathon that you're running during that time, but it's so important to do that. But once you've done that, have you found that sometimes you have so much pent-up demand that you start seeing that it's almost like at the end of the 90 days, you've got like so many opportunities and there's so much expectation coming from the business that, oh man, Tony, I'm so glad you're here. You're going to solve all of my problems. That expectation has been raised so high that now you've almost got a problem in your hand. It's like, okay, they're all expecting me to do everything now, to your point of now, later, at
Next
those next and later, they're all thinking now. and there's that inflection point where you've got to move really quickly to help them to get into the, actually, there's only so much we can do now. How do you manage those expectations through that transition?
I think it's a great point you're calling out, and it's very important that I didn't leave any of those sessions with 100 leaders saying I commit to doing all of this. I said, I heard you, and this is great. We see the opportunity together. Now let's get our teams work together to figure out. So we've had the ideation workshops that we would actually translate that into a roadmap where that leaders team is part of the process of laying out what can be done now, next, later, by mapping to things that are, hey, things that have funding, things that don't have funding, and things that are exploratory, like where I'm ready to make an investment from the central team in terms of running a data lab to try it and bring it to a point of proof of concept and value that you could then make the case. So we've structured that type of an approach coming out of it. But expectation management is huge. You didn't walk out of that meeting saying all can be done.
Yes.
You're walking out of the meeting saying, we understand the opportunities, we are clear, we understand what is broken and foundational, and we understand the art of the possible. Let's now work towards something that can be in a now, next, later frame that aligns to where the investments are, where we could make the small bets and help you make the case, and where there are other things another groups are doing that could be really valuable to you. Part of this conversation you will always find is that somebody wants X and there are two other people who are already doing X, and you could simply make the connection and life becomes simple, right? That's what we do.
Yeah, those situations where you can find a common thread that goes kind of across the organization, those are the big opportunities for sure. The other thing that I'm kind of curious about, because when you talked about looking at the value of each of these things that people are needing, you talked about creating a couple of columns and just keeping it simple, not trying to go crazy, create a science project out of it with everything mathematically kind of worked out. And I think that's also a really good approach, because you can end up in just tying yourself up in knots around how to determine value of things. But the flip side of the coin of that is always, how do you, once you've decided on what you're going to do, is you get started, and then people want to kind of measure the value. And so the actual metrics around, have we achieved what we thought we were going to achieve? How do you typically approach those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I don't think it's an easy thing to solve for all at once. Yeah. But here is how we have iterated through it, right? So I come at it at two altitudes. Altitude one is at a project level, every company has its own methodology on making the case, an ROI statement, proving it, etc. That exists at all the firms I've worked, so that continues. I'm not meddling with it. If one of my projects in the roadmap appear in that, we follow that methodology, and we can use that to feed what we're doing. So we leave that at that altitude, if you may, at a project level. But there is the other altitude, which is we are looking at it from large initiatives, which may have multiple projects, but an initiative which was to say, let's bring actionable intelligence to our client serving reps. Okay, now that's a big initiative. How do we measure the value of it? And you have to start from there's a notional view, and then there is a deeper view that we can provide. Some of it roll up from the project. But we take the simplistic lens at that higher altitude, which is what is the direct and indirect value. So direct is things that this initiative did as a collection of projects or actions from my team, which are not projects, which generated in, let's take growth, net new assets for the company. Okay, if it is, that's a measurable one where we would have had, ways in our marketing and sales analytics to figure out where direct contributions of NNA happened from those actions that we did. Then there is indirect, which is where we are saying this particular intelligence didn't exactly drive the NNA, but it is part of a larger set of collective decisions that the business did, which moved the needle. And I'm not arguing that the data did 3% of it or 5% of it. I'm just saying we were part of a major contributor to a larger set of growth that we saw in the quarter or the year for that business in the company. So that's good. We can do the same with CPS or NPS scores. We could do that with several other important company-wide metrics that are recognized, and we can connect that, direct and indirect. So we operate at that altitude. We also operate at the project level. And then my team continues to innovate on how do we track value. And that is a project ongoing by itself in how do we become more and more scientific. And we partner with our finance partners on that to do that as well, but not fully there. But today, this does the job for us. A lot more can be done. The crux of this is eventually, can this be used to help prioritize the work we are doing? And I think that's the key point we are keeping our eyes on.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so important to do that. So that's a great perspective, you know, to have those different altitudes. I think is a very good approach to take. Yeah, so the key is also the longer view, to take the longer view with people. So it kind of comes right back to what you said earlier about, you know, having the now, next, and later kind of approach, and helping people to realize that, hey, you know, some of these things we're trying to solve for, these opportunities that we're seeing, are things that have been developing over the decades of the company. They're not going to be solved like that. You know, it's not, there's no magic here. This requires work, and harnessing all the right stakeholders into it, as you said, and looking for that common thread is a great way to go. So, you know, I can see why you guys are being successful, because you're going about this as far as you know, my perspective is concerned, certainly in the right way. Tony, I think we'll take a break now and come back and hit the third segment, where we'll talk about talent and driving a data culture. Again, you've introduced that to us in the first segment a little bit, but we want to take a deeper dive there. So let's go ahead and take our short break now. And for the audience, please remember that there are 3 segments to this interview. So make sure you catch them all, and we'll see you shortly when we get back.
Thank you, Derek.